Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We'll get started in just a moment to allow a few more attendees to log in. In the meantime, here are a few housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available afterward. Closed captioning is available in your settings. To minimize disruptions, all microphones are muted and cameras are off. We'll hold a Q&A session after the presentations. Please submit your questions at any time using the Q&A function. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's SB 1383 Chat with CalRecycle. Today, we're focusing on edible food recovery. We understand that addressing edible food recovery, particularly with Tier 2 commercial edible food generators, such as large events and large venues, can be challenging. That's why we're thrilled to have our presenters share their successes and experiences in this area. My name is Julia Garcia, and I'll be your facilitator for today's chat. I'm an environmental scientist and subject matter expert on edible food recovery in CalRecycle's Local Assistance and Market Development branch. This session was organized by Diana Suarez Arguelles, who will also be supporting in the background. Also assisting are Darren Sprecher and Mallory Burden, providing technical support, Adriana Saliot and Wendy Dunlap handling presenter introductions, Zach Smith moderating the Q&A, and Alexis Ahrens, Michelle Chavez, Danielle Osborne, and Kyle Pogue answering questions. Now let's hear from our branch chief, Marshall Graham, to kick things off.
Good afternoon. It's wonderful to already see so many of you in the chat, greeting each other and getting us started off on such a great start. So again, welcome to the first SB 1383 chat of the year. I am super proud of all the SB 1383 implementation momentum we built throughout 2024. And I'm incredibly excited to see what we accomplished together this year. One of the most powerful means of engagement opportunities on SB 1383 have been these chats. And with that, I want to reiterate appreciation for the CalRecycle project team developing and running these webinars. And to our presenters, wow, thank you. It is a privilege to have access to individuals like yourself running innovative, effective programs and getting a glimpse of various program strategies, the information and resource sharing, and the networking that you offer is truly priceless. So again, thank you tremendously for making yourselves available and sharing your knowledge and experience with each of us. And I think that takes us back to you, our host, Julia.
Thank you, Marshall. Can we flip to the next slide? Before we continue, let's review a few logistical items about the Q&A process. For this webinar, we'll be using the Q&A function. If you have a question, please type it into the Q&A pane. While the chat function is available for sharing resources with other participants, we will not be monitoring the chat for questions. Please make sure to use the Q&A pane for that. If you do not see the Q&A pane, ensure you have the latest version of Zoom installed. Our team will review submitted questions on the Q&A pane throughout the webinar. If you're called upon to speak, please state your name, affiliation, and restate your question for clarity. If your question is directed to a specific panelist, be sure to mention that. If you're unable to unmute yourself or access the Q&A pane, feel free to email your questions to slcp.organics@calrecycle.ca.gov using the subject line SB 1383 Chat with CalRecycle. If we don't get to your question during the session, your land representative will follow up with you after the webinar. Can we flip to the next slide? Our presenters today are Disneyland Resort, Renaissance Pleasure Fair, Recreate Waste Collaborative, and Feeding It Forward with Bottle Rock, who will be sharing their strategies and successes in meeting SB 1383's edible food recovery requirements. Now, Wendy will introduce our first presenter. Wendy?
Hi, thank you, Julia. My name is Wendy Dunlap, and I am the local assistant representative for Anaheim, and it's my pleasure to introduce our first two speakers. The first is Michael Palazzola. Michael Palazzola is the Senior Manager, Regulated Waste and Field Operations at the Disneyland Resort in Anaheim, California. Michael oversees hazardous and non-hazardous waste operations and compliance at the resort. Some of his primary objectives for both hazardous and non-hazardous waste at the resort include minimization and recycling. Michael has prior experience in government environmental regulation as the program manager for Orange County Environmental Health Agency, OCEC. During his time with OCEC, Michael served on numerous state regulatory committees as well as led enforcement activities. Outside work, Michael and his family, Haley, have 3 daughters that keep them busy. The next speaker will be Natalie Willingham. Natalie Willingham is Chef de Cuisine and Environmental Sustainability at the Disneyland Resort in Anaheim, California. Chef Natalie is Chef de Cuisine with a focus on food sustainability for the Disneyland Resort's Environmental Sustainability team. With over 20 years of experience in the culinary field, she is working to implement a sustainable food system for the resort's parks and hotels. She received her degree in culinary arts at Western Culinary Institute of Portland, Oregon, and began her Disney career as a member of the opening team of the Grand Californian Hotel and Spa and Storytellers Cafe. She is respected for the honesty, integrity, and courage that she shows through storytelling and collaboration with various partners. When not at work, her time is occupied tending to the needs of her 3 active sons and balancing it all through yoga and prayer. And Natalie, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Wendy. I appreciate the introduction. Hello, everyone. Can we have the next slide, please? And the next slide after that. For today, we really just want to talk to you about what it is that we're doing at Disney, what has worked for us, what has not worked for us, and just some of our processes that are in place. Next slide, please. Okay, so pretty much we're talking about SB 1383. The starting point for us was to figure out the who, what, when, wheres, and whys, and make sure that that was communicated with our teams. Those are the questions that we had ourselves, and we knew those were the questions that the operators would be asking. We were able to put together a pretty good team of people that were just experts in their field. So for me, I was an expert with mainly culinary, but then also newly learning this environmental aspect. We also had experts that were focused on food safety, partners that were with our social responsibility team, as well as Michael, my co-host today, who also is focused with a different aspect of the environmental field. So I'm going to pass this off to him. Michael, go ahead and I'll let you kind of go on from here.
Thanks, Chef Natalie. So yeah, as Chef Natalie said, we really started diving in on the rules and regulations. You know, Disney, as Disney usually is, was kind of on the cutting edge. We had been doing food donation for a while, but you know, SB 1383 has really been a driver to make it official, and obviously with a compliance piece coming downstream. I guess one other note I just wanted to add on this is, you know, other diversion going on at the resort. We source separate scrap wood, scrap metal, cardboard, soft plastics, glass bottles, small rigid plastics. Our organics program includes things like manure and green waste on top of food scraps. And then we also have mixed recycling streams that include cans, bottles, and various papers. Next slide, please. So just as a kind of a highlight and overview today, when we're talking about the Disneyland Resort in Anaheim now includes 2 theme parks, the original Disneyland Park and then Disney California Adventure. It includes 3 hotels, the Grand California Hotel, the Disneyland Hotel, and the Pixar Pals Hotel. And then there's also a downtown Disney shopping and dining district, which includes a variety of tenant-operated retail locations, a few Disney-operated locations, and then also those are a mix of retail and food and dining spaces. So that when we're talking about the resort today, we are talking about all of that, encompassing all of that. Next slide, please. All right. So first, we kind of had to get our arms around, you know, everything at the resort. So we started off with a records request from Orange County Environmental Health, our local regulatory agency. We received back a current food permit list of 454 active permits. And so then we started kind of sifting through these to just get a better understanding of what type of food operations, you know, to make sure we weren't missing anything, or just, you know, if there was other strategical ways to group locations or to think about them as we rolled out a food donation program. So as you can see on this slide, this was a breakdown of what our permits look like. We have quite a few mobile carts at the resort that get rolled out on a daily basis. And then we have a number of restaurant locations as well. And then you can kind of see as it boiled down, we were looking at this time, this was at the kind of the beginning of our process with the city of Anaheim. We already had 6 locations in the resort that were participating in food donation. Next slide, please. So once we gathered our list of food facilities and we had those 454 permits in a spreadsheet, you know, we started trying to kind of assess and look at each location and, you know, with a lens for food donation in mind. So we kind of came up with what we called filters, you know, or lenses that we kind of looked at our list with. And so we had 3 primary focuses we looked at. First, is there vendor capacity and need for the product? So fortunately, we have a robust relationship with Second Harvest. They're able to take pretty much everything from us. You know, they do have their preferences of shelf-stable foods and frozen foods, but given the volume of the resort and, you know, SB 1383 as a driver, we even find ways to get, you know, sometimes some of our candy and other items to them, you know, still trying to adhere to kind of the 80-20 rules when it comes to, you know, good foods versus maybe non-healthy foods. The next filter we looked at is, you know, do we have the resources at these locations to maintain food safety standards? So Chef Natalie mentioned that, you know, part of our initial entourage, we had some food safety experts. So that was very helpful in kind of looking at our HACCP program. So, you know, how we control food safety standards. Is it time under temperature? Are we, do we have refrigeration systems? Do we have freezer systems? And what kind of space availability do they have for a donation program? So this was kind of, looking at what our current logistics were, with an understanding, that we may have to improve those logistics in certain areas if we want to bring that area up to speed as a food donation location. And then kind of the last lens that we looked at was, does this location have minimum levels of food? So, in terms of looking at restaurants where you have made to order food versus maybe a location that utilizes a buffet service line, and so they're making trays of food. And so we took that into consideration when we were looking at all our permits to see, what does the operation look like at this location? How much waste food is being generated? And, are there, and is that just a nature of that location that they will have large amounts of food waste? Because I guess obviously from a back-end business perspective, it's in our nature to want to minimize food waste because that's wasting revenue at the same time. Next slide, please. All right, so then after applying the filters and getting a good sense of what our program looked like, we started kind of a 3-phase, I guess, meet and greet really with the city and the city's consultants to start reviewing our food program as a large venue facility. So I guess backtracking just a little bit, I was showing the Disneyland Resort and the different pieces. And when you overlay that with the SB 1383 regulations, we have hotels that fall in as large venue facilities. The resort as a whole is a large venue facility. And then we even have some restaurant locations that are considered large venue facilities. So it is an interesting amalgamation of multiple large venue facilities that all feed up into one ultra large venue facility. So we ended up doing kind of 3 different site walks with the city of Anaheim and their consultants just to go over some of our various operations. We toured both parks. On another day, we toured the hotels, and then on a third day, we actually toured the downtown Disney area and met with a variety of chefs and team leaders throughout the food and beverage process. And I guess the good news, the great news, I guess, that came out of that is on our final joint site walk we were doing, we came across one of the operating partners that was in downtown Disney. They're called Jazz Kitchen, and they've had a food donation contract in place for a while. They've been administering their program, and their logs were ready for review. So we were actually able to get our first compliance inspection done for a vendor location in downtown Disney. So that was exciting for them. It was also exciting for the resort because now we kind of have a model for the other operating partners where it's not just us. They can look to kind of their peers as to what they're doing to implement the program. So that was pretty exciting conclusion to that partnership with the city of Anaheim. Next slide, please. I'll go ahead and pass it back to Chef Natalie now.
Thank you, Michael. I do want to just add too that, so on that previous slide, it showed that only 6 locations were donating at this time. It is kind of important to understand how Disney works. A lot of our locations, or some of the places that were listed, we kind of consider them as like the satellite locations, and they're kind of like the mom that feeds off to the children that are all throughout the park. So they may be responsible for one location, one kitchen may be responsible for producing food for, let's say, at least 20 carts or different units or smaller restaurants. So please understand that as we kind of talk through. But my approach with speaking and communicating this out to the food and beverage leaders of the resorts is to just tell them what steps we need them to take in order to ensure that we are in compliance. The biggest thing that they can do is to monitor their orders. Usually, depending upon the vendor, we're able to get our orders anywhere from 5 to 6 days a week delivered. So we have fresh items, we have vendors on property all the time, and there's no reason for them to be ordering excessively, considering that they can get the product the next day. There are some exceptions when there's holidays and various things going on within the resort, but realistically, they can just tightly monitor their orders to make sure that they are reducing and they're not over ordering. We don't have excess. And when they do have excess, the biggest thing they can do also is just to follow up with their teams to understand the reasons why the excess is there, how they can control it, and then just to monitor it, hold them accountable to ensure that it doesn't occur again. And then once they are able to identify it, they recognize that they may not have any other way to utilize that product. We are asking them to just set it aside and figure out how it's going to be redeployed or repurposed. Um, Within the resort, we may do something where we're like recognizing our cast members, where we celebrate them for doing something good, and we'll use food, excess food in that manner. But if we're not able to do that, then we are partnering with our various local nonprofit organizations and asking them to take our excess product. And then as a very, very last resort, we do place our items into food scraps. The food waste that enters there, it does not just go to the landfill. It is something that we're able to process, and it does get turned into animal feed. Next slide, please. Okay, so I don't want to call out just Second Harvest, but they are the main one that we go through, but they are doing great things. They're a very, very great organization. They feed 442,000 people monthly. They have 300 partners that undergo a very intensive process to make sure that they do qualify and meet their standards. So it includes churches, schools, youth centers, recovery centers, and healthcare centers. And they are always taking donations in case anybody wants to help. But Second Harvest, they do a great job. And then as the primary organization that we work with, they have a lot of sub companies or sub organizations that we have also partnered with if it is something that Second Harvest is not able to take directly. Next slide. Okay, so this is a little bit just kind of explaining what they are looking for when it comes to their product. Michael did mention the 80-20 rule. We do try to do that with every single pickup. They like to have 80% nutritious items, so something that's low in salt, low in fat, low in saturated fat, no sugar added. Those are the main ingredients that they are looking for. Whether it's frozen, fresh, canned, they will most likely take it as long as it follows within that rule. But on the occasions, especially after something like our Oogie Boogie Bash, we had an excessive amount of candy and just sweet products that happen to come along with the holidays and especially the Halloween season. So as long as we're able to find that balance where it's the 80% nutritious and only the 20% of the non-nutritious, they are able to take it. They do take things, their second choice or their least preferred are the items that do contain salt. So like it may be like some of the processed cans that you'll see that do have salt added or sugar added, but they will usually find a way to take that. And then the rarely accepted is things such as the candy, the junk food, the chips, and things that are just that none of us should really be eating, but that taste delicious anyway. Next slide, please. Okay, and these are the steps that we use at the resort to donate. It's kind of a going back to the previous slide where we are just asking all of our locations to identify their excess inventory. From there, we have put together a core group that is focused on just making sure that any excess product is being redeployed. So we're helping out the locations saying, okay, tell us what you have. We'll do the work just to make sure that it gets where it needs to, and we are coordinating the pickups and the drop-offs. So from there, we're asking to identify, to reach out to us through email. We're asking that they share a lot of the information that the donation centers or our nonprofits are looking for. Thankfully, they didn't need the full ingredient breakdown, but they are mainly concerned with just allergens that are inside of there. So also just for tax reasons, we need to make sure that we are properly documenting this information. While we were speaking with some of our core group, trying to understand what was needed and how to best articulate and communicate this, we had to pull in our finance, a couple of people that work like our finances, as well as a computer system that we use to kind of track all of our inventory. We had to get their feedback just to make sure that everything did match up, and we were able to incorporate that in this process as well, just to make it a little bit easier and more seamless so that we're not doing a lot of back and forth when it comes to the tracking of product. And we can accurately record and state that, hey, this is what we have donated for this month. So once the teams have identified that, they have given us the information that we requested, we're asking them to drop the food product off at one of 3 locations that we've designated, where there's one for each of the parks and then one for the hotels. Once they have that product, we are asking them to make sure that they're entering it into our system. And with that system, we want them to print a receipt just to make sure that it was entered accordingly, so that we do recognize that the food has been properly marked and it is marked as donation. And then from there, we're able to partner with the local nonprofit. Most recently, it has been either Second Harvest directly, or it's been OC Food Harvest, OC Rescue Mission. And with there, they're able to come onto property, pick up the product directly from us. There have been a few occasions when we have overestimated what we were going to use or what we thought that we were going to use, and those items were reaching their expiration points. Thankfully, most of Second Harvest has been really great about working with our vendors and has been able to coordinate direct pickups with them. So the normal process would be for them to just charge us for the product and then they find a way to dispose of it. But rather than doing that, we're using this program to make sure that, yes, we are going to be billed for it. Yes, it may have expired or it's close to expiring, but we are finding a new way to repurpose it or give it life and make sure that it is reaching those that do need the food. So they're able to go directly to our vendors on some occasions, pick up the product, and then take it directly to where it does need to be. And I believe that was it from me. Unless, Michael, there was anything that you wanted to add on.
No, great job. I'm sure there'll be some questions in the Q&A later, but I think we covered everything we came to discuss today.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks.
Should we pass it back to Wendy? Are you there?
I will take it from here. Thank you, Michael and Natalie, for that insightful presentation. It's my pleasure to introduce Kirsten Selway, Food and Beverage Manager for Renaissance Entertainment Productions. She's been in the large event and festival industry for over 25 years and has been working with caterers to donate leftover food in the most efficient manner for over 20 years. Kirsten will be presenting with Antonella Zamora Galvez, Recycling Outreach Specialist 2 for Recreate Waste Collaborative. Antonella graduated from Cal State Long Beach and began working with Recreate Waste Collaborative in 2021. She's led several edible food recovery projects since the beginning of 2022, providing hundreds of SB 1383 inspections to generators and organizations. Kirsten and Antonella, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone.
Go ahead, Antonella.
Oh, thank you, Kirsten. Hi, everyone. My name is Antonella, and I'm pleased to speak to my experience being an edible food inspector working with a large event. I'm also pleased to introduce Kirsten, the event coordinator for the Renaissance Pleasure Fair. Next slide, please. So a little background. Our company Recreate is a subcontractor to SES Engineers on the Regional Food Recovery Program for the San Gabriel Valley Council of Governments, SGVCOG. We inspect and provide assistance to edible food generators, food recovery organizations, and food recovery services on behalf of their partnered jurisdictions. This project began in 2022, and I lead the team that works in 11 cities. SGVCOG is also partnered with the food donation app Carrot, which provides an easy method of donation and record keeping for generators and organizations. Next slide, please. The Renaissance Pleasure Fair is one of the oldest annual events that take place for 7 weekends from April to May in Irwindale, California. It's a fun, immersive experience with crafts, live entertainment, and interactive activities. Our outreach to the Renaissance Pleasure Fair began in 2022 on behalf of the city of Irwindale. Kirsten, if you'd like to add a little bit more on the Renaissance Pleasure Fair, please do.
Yeah, so we've been in operation for over 60 years, making us one of the oldest festivals in the nation and a very successful festival as well. And we now operate in 3 different states. And for the last 20 years, we've been partnering with local food pantries, soup kitchens, battered women's shelters to donate at the end of the 7-week run. And in other states, we've had great success. In California, it's been a little more challenging, surprisingly. But since SB 1383 has come into effect, I think it's raised a lot of awareness on the need and desire to reuse and recycle all of the leftover food after these large events and festivals. So I think we can go on to the next slide.
So some large events face challenges with food donation. This includes logistical barriers, such as coordinating with a diverse array of food vendors. They also need to find a partner with they also need a partner with an organization capable of managing bulk donations, and equipped with proper food handling practices, which include refrigerated trucks for perishable items. With this being a yearly event, staff turnover can lead to new team members being unaware of the existing food program. So these are just some of the challenges from our perspective. Kirsten, please take it away if
Yeah, correct. So in Los Angeles, we apply for about 50 different food permits each year, not counting the carts and small locations as well as beverage locations. And the difficulty we're finding at this is a lot of these caterers are small family-owned businesses that go from one weekend event to the next. So they are packaging up the food and taking it to the next event, which is wonderful. It's not getting wasted, but there's been very little to donate. I myself also own a catering company, and I do handle larger events. And we have made it common practice in the last 2 decades to donate almost everything at the end of each large event. So the struggles we have found is transporting it and finding a shelter that is open to accepting, as Disneyland said, foods that aren't necessarily the most nutritious or easy to find a home for. So we've been working really hard with the city of Irwindale and trying to find those homes for that food, and it's been working very well. But the staff training also comes into play with these special events and weekend festivals. It is a different staff in every location, and so we've put together some guidelines and trainings for staff and assistants to go to each location and to best use the food and make sure that the ordering is done correctly so that there isn't a lot of waste. So I think we can go next slide. Yeah, next slide.
So we met with Renaissance Pleasure Fair in November 2022. I dropped by their office and spoke with a member of their team. I gave them SB 1383 flyers and carrot information. I was told that their event coordinator has a system in place for excess food, which involves either taking it home or giving it to staff to take home. Our second meeting took place in April 2023, where we met with Kirsten, who, is highly passionate about preventing edible food waste, and we could tell right off the bat this was very near and dear to her. She mentioned that the most excess food occurs on the Monday following the event in late May. Kirsten expressed openness to collaborating with nearby organizations and created a carrot account to track future donations. Our team stopped by their office in November 2023, where it was noted the importance of following up with Kirsten directly after the event concludes, which we did the following year. So next slide, please. Our fourth meeting was in May 2024. We met with Kirsten in early May, and she voiced difficulty in finding an organization. Our inspector sent more information for nearby organizations to Kirsten, and I followed up with Kirsten at the end of May 2024, just to learn more about how donations went. She explained that the first organization that showed up arrived late and didn't take all the donations, and luckily Kirsten called another nearby organization, Foothill Unity Center, and they were able to pick up the remaining donations. Going forward, donations will be made to this organization through Carrot. And I want to point out that the picture on this slide shows the non-perishable foods Kirsten was able to donate after the 2024 event. So quite a lot. Kirsten, if you want to speak a little bit more to, this experience.
Yeah, I think the most important part of this experience is to make sure that there is an organization that can pick this up at a specific time and date and has proper food safety in hand, such as a refrigeration truck, to pick these up. It's not easy, again, when coordinating that many caterers and gathering all the food together safely. So if you see in that picture in the rear is a refrigerated trailer, which I own personally, and filled that with all of the caterers' leftover perishables for donation. And that's not always available in every location or with every caterer or every large event. So I think it's just really important to make sure you have those in place weeks, if not months, prior to hosting any type of event like this.
Definitely. Next slide, please. So, we continue to learn from every business we work with, and working with the large event, you realize that some months of the year are best when it comes to following up with them. You'll often get a window of opportunity that might not align with inspection schedules, but a call or email to follow up is really important, especially once the event is close to being over or right after it's over. The more touch points with the business, the better the results. And although there were a few setbacks with Renaissance Pleasure Fair, finding the right organization for them, their team really persevered and were able to troubleshoot the challenges that came their way. For the event this year in 2025, with the groundwork that Kirsten and her team have laid, we anticipate they'll have a very successful donation experience. So I'm going to hand it over now for the next few slides to Kirsten. She's going to talk a little bit more about the behind the scenes. So thank you. Next slide, please.
So at the beginning of all of the events I do, I send out an email similar to this. This is actually one I sent out last year to all caterers, asking that they keep this in mind, that they're prepared for it, to let me know right away when their donations are ready. And then I have a team ready to pick up their donations and bring it to a commissary area for pickup at the conclusion of every event that I do. So you can move to the next slide. So again, informing the vendors that this food program is available, goes out via email, and then I follow up in person the following week just to remind them how important it is to give back to our community and to give back to those in need, and that festivals like this are really important as a part of the community, and it's important to show how supportive we can be to those around us. And we stored that food, as I said, in my personal food refrigeration and freezer trailers. I understand that's not always available. However, I feel like when we come together as a community on these large events, we can always figure something out with the refrigeration. It's also really important, though, to make sure that the organizations picking up the food have a 1 hour window to make sure that that food is picked up and as fresh and usable as possible. And for those starting this program, it really does just take tenacity and continue to contact and communicate with everyone involved. Another important item to point out to the caterers is the tax benefits as well. And that is part of my responsibility to make sure that the organizations, the nonprofits, have all of the information needed to provide tax benefits to each caterer. It's actually a huge benefit to them. So let's move on to the next slide. And I guess that is all. Makes it seem easy, although it is not easy. Like I said, lots of tenacity, lots of wherewithal, and lots of communication to all caterers.
And I want to thank Kirsten. She's, really passionate and you guys want to know more, here's our contact information if you want to email us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Antonella and Kirsten, for your presentation. Before we move on, wanted to remind participants that we are using the Q&A function to accept questions. So if you have questions on any of the previous presentations or one that's coming up, please feel free to enter your questions there. Passing it on to Adriana.
Thank you, Julia, and thank you to our previous presenters. My name is Adriana, and I am the local assistance liaison to the Napa County area. It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Margaret Perry. Margaret is the Executive Director of Feeding It Forward in Napa, California. Her specialty with event waste management helps Feeding It Forward with their mission to reduce food waste and alleviate hunger in the Napa Valley. With her experience as a Chamber of Commerce CEO and Executive Director in the business improvement field, she is proud to share her leadership expertise with other community partners. A fun fact about Margaret is that when she attends special events, her camera reel is usually full of recycling bins and overflowing trash. She often quips, "Garbage is my life." Margaret, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Adriana. Hi, everybody. It's so great to see so many people active and engaged in food recovery. Warms my heart. Feeding It Forward, of course, rescues excess food waste, mostly perishable, from donors, and then we redistribute out into the community to other organizations. So that's why we're here. And today I want to talk a little bit about our food recovery at the famous Bottle Rock Festival and the Festival La Onda in Napa at the fairgrounds. Next slide. And next slide, that's just a mountain of food, which we have all seen, mountains of food. Before we all got smart and engaged in this process, we all would see, well, this is what caused me to be passionate, is to see a 20-yarder full of landfill. And that was the beginning of my passion for food recovery, and that was in 2010. So we've come a long way, baby. Next slide. We partner with Latitude 38, which is the festival producer for both La Onda and Bottle Rock festivals here at the Napa Fairgrounds. The key for doing any kind of food recovery, which many of you have already alluded to, is finding the right person who is the decision maker and making that all happen from the beginning. Next slide. So, most important, I think everybody in this room will agree that you want to create an agreement in writing. I'm sure Kirsten would agree with that as well. Find out who is responsible for what. Who's going to handle the cold storage? Where does shelf-stable storage go? Who's going to communicate with the vendors? All of those important things. These are logistics that you have to consider. Next slide, please. Yeah, most importantly, we're a small but mighty unit in Napa. We rely heavily on volunteers and our active board of directors. So we're very hands-on, minimal staff. So building a strong team, for those of you that don't have massive resources, you can certainly do it with passionate people like us. And you can see the smiles on these faces. They're proud and feel great about what they're doing here. Next slide. Let's talk money. You know, it seems like this would be an easy no-brainer thing to recover food from a giant festival, but it takes some money. So what you need to find out first is whoever you're working with, odds are pretty good that they know they need to recover food. They understand SB 1383, and they'll probably make a donation for your organization if you are a nonprofit. Otherwise, put together a fee structure if you're going to be assisting them with their reduction in food waste. Remember, before you begin, create a budget. You want to find out how many staff hours are going to be dedicated to this particular project. This isn't your only work. You have much more things to do throughout the year. So find out what's going to cost what. Do you need to buy volunteers buy volunteers. Buy volunteers t-shirts, for example, to identify them. Things like that. Who's going to handle the refrigerated trucks or storage units? I have a little logo there with our friends at Napa Recycling and Waste Management, Waste Services. These folks are in your communities. Many of them are here on this chat, and they want to help you do this work. Next slide. This is a lot of details, way more than anybody asked for, but I wanted to share with you our vendor letter. We make sure that Latitude 38 has notified all food vendors in advance. You know, best laid plans. Did they read it? We're not sure, but they do understand that there is a food recovery program for this festival. We explain all of the tax benefits and many reasons why they should be saving their excess food for us to send back out into the community. Next. We also, which I'm sure many of you already understand, but we do share with our food vendors that we follow the Good Samaritan law and that we take responsibility of the food, and our concern is climate safety, climate temperature controlled is what I mean, and we relieve them of that stress and that burden. Next. Okay, so let's talk about safety for a minute. It has been discussed early on. Food storage, portable storage. We really need to make sure that we are being safe with the food that is going to be feeding your community in a very short while. So volunteers need to be trained, and we also need to make sure they're covered. So it's a simple little sort of housekeeping thing that maybe not everybody thinks of, but behind the scenes, you've got to check with your carrier and make sure anybody who is handling food is not only insured, but understands food safety. So we also use volunteers for a variety of things. Make sure you're matching their abilities with the work entailed. First aid kit is critical when you're doing food recovery at a festival. I think everybody would agree with that. Somebody is definitely going to need a Band-Aid. I, unfortunately, am usually the first one. Maintain food safety temperatures at all times. We all know this. Next. Okay, so we weigh in everything, in and out, all donations by category. So during that process, when we're collecting from the food vendor, we have a specific form pre-completed with that food vendor's contact information. So we have a list of all the vendors prior to food donations of the day. And when we go out, we just pull up their form on our clipboard, and we can quickly make sure we have the appropriate contact information and that we give them their weights and their results of their donations. Next. Here's an example. Again, way more information than anybody wanted, but I wanted to show you all how we track our food that we recover. Really critical because we don't really have any waste. By the time we're done, if it's not edible anymore, it goes to the chickens. We do have a collection of non-food that we recover. And initially, when I first saw a pallet of electronics and other festival goods, and I thought, why on earth are we taking all of this stuff? And then I realized, you know, this is good, usable items. I know we're talking about food recovery today, but what a joy it was to take a pallet of goods and redistribute it back into the Napa community within the next day. Next. Here's some day of details for those of you who do a smaller scale food recovery, such as ourselves. We all meet, all the volunteers, at an agreed upon location. We set up the roles, make sure everybody understands their primary objective for the day, make sure they're in identifying bright colors that the food vendors are going to know who we are and why we're there. Volunteers disperse immediately. They go out in hand trucks, golf carts, whatever means, and start collecting the food and then getting it back in, weighed, and into refrigeration and storage. Next. Here's just a couple of examples. This is, a golf cart is really critical if you can get one for the site. We usually get a couple and get some hand radios and make sure that we're all communicating. And if there's a large donation that's going to require a forklift, we're all on site and we can all communicate safely. Next. Like I just said, a forklift or a pallet, we have sponsors that maybe have excess food and product that they didn't distribute over the festival, and those leftovers they really don't want to take with them. And by all means, we will take them and give them a good home. Next. So where? We're going to give them a good home? Well, where does the food go? So we work with about 45 different community-based organizations. We don't distribute direct to individuals. So it's really important that you have those community partners in place well before you're talking about food recovery, because the food needs a home and it needs a home quick. So we, even the night of the festival, that evening, once we've collected the bulk of the food, we actually call some of our larger donors over, like our farm workers in Napa. Salvation Army takes a bundle. So truckloads go out that evening as quick as can be. And then the following morning, we set up in the community church parking lot, and everybody has a reserved time slot that they come in and they get food for their specific organizations. It's a beautiful thing to see when you not only see this food being utilized, but the smiles on the faces from the groups picking up. It's really a great feeling. And also we weigh again. So now we're weighing by organization as we distribute. So we know what we brought in, not only what we sent out, but who we sent it to. Next. In fact, who we sent it to, this is on the left, our wonderful Director of Operations and Programs, and that is Anya, and she is a whiz at making sure everybody gets in and gets out and gets what they need for their organization. To the right is our fabulous driver, Christian, and one of our board members, Daniel, who was a volunteer the day of Bottle Rock and has since joined the board. Next. So that's a wrap, but there's a lot more that still has to take place. What happens next? We want to make sure that those tax donation letters go out to each and every vendor. And we also complete a detailed recap for the event producer. And this event is ongoing, it's annual, and we continue this relationship with Latitude 38. And it's a match made in heaven, I would say. And with that, I would just say thank you. And if you have some questions, you can move to the next slide. My contact information is here for you. And I thank you all for coming and for all this magical food recovery work we're all doing together.
Thank you so much, Margaret. And let's give a virtual round of applause for all of our presenters. I want to extend a huge thank you to all of our presenters. We are so grateful that you could share your programs, and thank you for your participation. Before we open up the floor to questions, we are going to bring up our slide that talks about our Q&A session guidelines. We do remind you that we have respectful expectations in this space just during our discussion time. So this includes being open to sharing new perspectives, being mindful of others, waiting to ask questions, and speaking respectfully. Moving on to the next slide. You may remember this slide from the beginning. Here's the directions for asking a question. So for this webinar, we will be using the Q&A function. Please type a summary of your question into the Q&A pane. You may use the chat pane to share information or resources with other panelists, but please do not put your questions into the chat. We will not be monitoring the chat for questions. If you do not see the Q&A pane, please make sure you have the most updated version of Zoom. My colleagues and I will be filtering through your questions. Once called upon, please unmute yourself and state your name, affiliation, and restate your question. If your question is geared towards a specific panelist, please note that. CalRecycle is also available to answer questions, so feel free to include your edible food recovery at large venue and events questions for CalRecycle too. We will also be monitoring our SLCP inbox throughout the chat. So you can send your feedback or questions for panelists to slcp.organics@calrecycle.ca.gov. Use the subject line SB 1383 chat with CalRecycle. If you cannot unmute yourself or are unable to use the Q&A pane, please also submit those questions to the SLCP inbox. If we do not get to your questions during the Q&A session, we will have your land representative get back to you. So you will notice that we have been answering some questions in the Q&A pane. We are going to read those questions out loud in order to memorialize the questions as part of the webinar recording and to give the person asking the question a chance to ask any additional questions or clarify to make sure that the answered their question. So I am going to pass the floor over to Zach now, who is going to begin our Q&A session. Zach.
Thank you, Mallory. My name is Zach Smith. I'm an environmental scientist with CalRecycle. And our first question here is going to be directed at Disneyland. This question is, how does Disneyland plan to reduce food waste at restaurants? They notice after going to Disney for years, the portions looked smaller, but also more affordable. Is making the portions smaller a consideration? That is our question. Disneyland, go ahead.
Thank you for the question. We are trying to make sure that we do serve our guests realistic portions. I think that just in America in general, we have had that oversized mentality for a while. So we do take into consideration what will actually be eaten and consumed fully by our guests, because we really just don't want to see items in the trash. So that is something that we are taking into consideration, smaller portion sizes, and just being more cautious about what we are putting on the plate, trying to make sure that that it is all fully consumed.
And I want to just add something else that Chef Natalie had highlighted during her presentation was just that the food and beverage team rolled out a new software system and inventory system that's even more robust in tracking all kinds of various data elements. I was told by someone it even factors in like the weather conditions and stuff when planning for attendance or forecasting for future orders. So it's pretty impressive, I guess, all the different sources of information that they're leveraging to make these decisions to not have extra food waste. So great question.
Like ultimately the extra food waste, it is extra money as well. So to take it and just throw it away, it's bad business.
All right, thank you, Chef Natalie. Thank you, Michael. Our next question is for Renaissance Pleasure Fair. And this question was from Nayiri. Nayiri, please unmute yourself and read your question out loud for us. And please correct me if I mispronounced your name there as well.
Hi, I think they already answered my question in the chat.
We are answering questions in the chat, but if you are able to read it out loud, that will allow us to capture it for the recording as well. And that goes to other participants too. Thank you.
Sure. I asked 2 questions regarding it, but I'll just say both of them. So I said, for Ren Fair, isn't each vendor private? And would they have to donate on their own, or does Ren Fair organize this? And the second portion was, does each vendor have to donate? Because I know each one is a different size and has a different requirement. So I'm just wondering how that works since each vendor is technically private.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and answer that. Since every vendor is private, we leave it up to them whether they can donate or not. However, we do everything in our power to make it easy for them to donate. So we have a team that will come to them and collect the food, and we will store it for them. And we will provide them with the receipt as well once it's picked up. So that gives them a little more incentive to want to donate. And what was the second question? Refresh me.
Let's see. Are we able to get Nairi to unmute herself again?
You know what? Oh, I think she said, is it required to donate? And no, it's not required because each one is a small individual caterer. They don't necessarily have food left at the end to donate, so we can't require something that is non-existent. What I do require though is that they acknowledge they have received my email and that they've acknowledged that we are willing to pick up any leftover food and donate it for them. So that is the only thing we do require, is that they acknowledge that this exists and that they have nothing to donate.
Perfect. Thank you, Kirsten. Okay, our next question is for really any of our presenters here who are interested in answering this one. This question was from Arlene too. Arlene, are you able to unmute yourself and read your question out loud for the chat?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so my question was, have you donated food from self-serve buffets? We have a buffet in our city that has been reluctant to donate food due to food safety concerns. Would you be able to provide any advice or best practices for donations from these type of food generators?
All right, and Margaret, I see your hand up. You can go ahead and go first if you'd like, and then it looks like Natalie might be ready to go after you.
What a great question. And I'm so glad somebody asked it. No, once food goes out to a buffet or has been served or presented, it is no longer recoverable for us. Now, if there are plenty of trays in the back in the kitchen that have all been maintained proper temperature control, then by all means, we go in the back, in the kitchen, wherever, and we take tray after tray after tray that wasn't actually utilized. But no, if it's once it's been out and to the public, we don't touch it.
Margaret said it perfectly. That's exactly what I was going to say. Our food safety standards at Disneyland, it does not allow us to take out anything, to donate anything that has been served to the public. But again, anything that's in the back, as long as it's been properly held and the temperature is as it should be, we can donate that.
I would like to just add to that those, even though we can't do the stuff that goes out to the buffet line, actually buffets that seem to be a good target for food donation for the stuff that might get prepped that doesn't get served, right? So if you have trays of mashed potatoes or chicken, those items, a lot of times you can freeze them pretty easily and manage them. So while we can't manage like the front end stuff that's on the buffet, at least at Disneyland Resort, the locations, there are locations with buffet style service, and they like to have enough inventory, for lack of a better term, to make it all the way through park close. Well, to do that, you're inevitably probably going to have some stuff staged in the back ready to go. And so there is a nexus, at least at the Disneyland Resort, that we see buffet locations as a potential, a strong potential for the food donation program. But it's not the items as mentioned on the line, it's the back of house items. So.
True, and for those items too that we are disposing of for our buffets, we do have an outlet at Disney as well. It's like, it's not just being, again, it's not going to the landfill. We do have the ability to turn that into animal feed. And if you have the ability in your location, maybe you can do a compost or something else, depending upon the quantity and what you have available to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Margaret, Chef Natalie, and Michael for those for that insight on that question. Does anybody from our Renaissance Pleasure Fair team want to chime in on this one? I'll give you guys a few seconds here if so.
We don't really have any buffet type food or anything that goes out to the public and is left at the end of the day. So I don't have much to add on that one, other than I completely agree that once it is out, we cannot take it back. So.
All right, thank you, Kirsten. Our next question, this is another one that could be directed at Margaret here. And the question for Margaret is from Ciara Lowe. Ciara, if you're able to unmute yourself and read that question out loud for us, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, hi. And this is a similar question actually that I did ask both of Margaret and then of Kristen as well. So I can just double that up there. I was just wondering if you could speak a little more about the types of food that were donated. I know, and also the types of vendors. I know that there are a lot of restrictions on what can be donated from mobile food facilities. So I'm wondering if these events have food trucks or if it's a different sort of setup, and then what types of food are donated. Thank you.
Great question. And being in Napa, there's a giant VIP area. So that's a whole different combination of recovery for food that we might get from the food vendors. Not really food trucks per se, they're vendor booths, and it's very uniform. However, the VIP area, we had some unusual things. I'm not gonna kid around, like, like a wheel of cheese, a wheel, okay. Let's figure out how to divide that and get it back out into the community. And some things, are, I don't know, giant jars of olives, whatever it is, we take it, we find it a home. But generally, what Feeding It Forward is focused on is prepared foods. After the festival, we had a food vendor who was a local restaurant, and he still had 20 trays of smoked chicken in his restaurant cold storage, which needed to be distributed, maybe overestimated for the festival and that particular item. So the next day we were able to get over there to his walk-in and get those 20 trays of protein and back out into the community. So truthfully, to answer your question, Kiara, it is every kind of food imaginable.
Yeah, I agree. It is, we have every type imaginable as well. However, with our more semi-permanent locations, we, for instance, this summer donated at the end 30 cases of turkey legs, dozens of cases of bread from the bakery because we have it delivered weekly, flour, cooking items. Yeah, there's just everything imaginable, and it can go, the beauty of it is a lot of these are food pantries that can make meals out of these, or a lot of them are, I should say, soup kitchens, which make meals, and a lot of them are pantries in which they can take the smaller items and put them into grocery boxes that are then distributed. So anything and everything is donated from us.
Thank you both. And I wanted to tack onto that question a little bit, Kirsten. There was one other part of Ciara's question, which was, did you receive pushback from caterers, or were most of the caterers receptive to donation?
Yeah, absolutely. So when all the caterers, and I think everyone has probably dealt with this, learned that this was a mandatory requirement from the state of California, I got a lot of hems and haws and pushback of so many rules and regulations. But when I gently explained, and again, we've had a couple years now to implement this, and explain to them, look, it's not going to take away from you, your time. If there's anything left, just send one of my team members. They have a list of our available people that will put together a team. We'll pick up from you, we will store, and we will bring you back a receipt. So when we took the work out of it for them, they were more inclined to get on board.
Thank you, Kirsten. That makes a lot of sense. Our next question is for Disneyland, and this question was from Polina Osipova. Paulina, please go ahead and unmute yourself and read that question out loud for the chat.
Okay. I actually had two questions for Disneyland. Which one was it?
This was the question that was asking about their relationship with the city of Anaheim.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so yes, I just wanted to ask for a little more detail about what was the role of the city of Anaheim and their consultant, and the role that they played in the partnership that was mentioned. Thank you.
I can start off with that. So City of Anaheim is essentially our local enforcement agency. And I guess specifically, I'm pretty sure it's the Public Works Department that oversees this aspect of SB 1383. But I think part of it was through the CalRecycle's rollout of the compliance program and ensuring all cities had some visibility into their jurisdiction. And so I think Disneyland being one of the main large venue facilities in the city of Anaheim, they reached out to us just to understand more about what we were doing at the resort, in terms of meeting SB 1383 compliance. So I think it was a precursor to compliance and just getting the program up and running, and they were partnering with some consultants that were also assisting in just, I think, making sure the city-wide program was in line with CalRecycle's requests. So that's my understanding of the relationship.
Yeah, and I'm just going to add that Disneyland, of course, we were the very first one. We were the guinea pigs. So I think it was a learning opportunity for them as well as for us. They were really looking to see what we were doing right that they could share with other businesses in the area. And if we had any challenges or if there was any way that the city would be able to help us if we needed anything. So yeah, it was a discovery for both.
Thank you, Chef Natalie, and thank you, Michael, as well. Our next question is for Margaret, and this question was from Kristen Sales. Kristen, do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and read that question out loud for us? Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, it's Kristen Sales. Margaret, yeah, I just wanted to know, since you're in Napa and I'm in Sonoma, if you ever donate excess edible food to different counties like Sonoma County or any of your neighboring counties, and how you kind of collaborate with food recovery organizations in your region, not just your county.
Great question, and it's an important one. We're all busy doing great work and important work in our communities. We stay in Napa County almost exclusively. We do have a couple of pickups that we do in Sonoma, but it's just maybe 2 or 3. But for the most part, we refer any direct inquiries to fellow organizations if it's outside of our area for the most part. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Sure.
All right. Thank you, Margaret. And thank you, Kristen, for that correction on your last name there, too. Paulina, we can get back to your second question for Disneyland here. And this is the question that you had about the percentage of food donated. Paulina, go ahead and unmute yourself and read that question out loud for the chat, please.
Sure, thank you. Okay, so I am curious about what percentage of food that Disneyland donates is prepared food. We know this is a very challenging food type to donate, and I'm curious what insights you've gained about working with and donating this type of food. Thank you.
Right now, it's not a very large percentage. Most of the excess items that we are donating, they are the packaged goods or just stuff that was left over from various events or activations that we can no longer utilize. There is an opportunity for some items, but again, it's on a very a very small scale. The chefs and the leaders of the resorts, they do a really, really good job of just monitoring what is being prepped and produced so that we minimize what we have left over. We have a lot of systems in place just to make sure that we're not going overboard. It's like on the rare occasions that we do ask them to just kind of freeze the product if possible. So say if we have extra turkey legs that can't be reheated and used that following morning, take those turkey legs, put them into like a disposable product, like an aluminum pan, like the ones that you guys see at Thanksgiving that everybody brings to family functions. Put it inside of that, leave it in the freezer, and when you have a decent enough amount to donate, contact the team, and then we can get it to the local nonprofits. But again, it's like we try to monitor it very closely so that we don't have excess.
And I will add to that, as we've gone down this route, you know, there is the Good Samaritan Act, which was brought up, which I think is very important to understanding as part of food donation and some of the, you know, safety securities that provides, right? But I think there still is a general, you know, to doing the right thing in terms of food allergies. We've worked on like labeling and identification of ingredients in products and coming up with, you know, trying to find some balance to properly identify and let people know where there might be some hazards or risks with the food. But, you know, also understanding, you know, that we're trying to get it out there for consumption. So that is, I guess, another challenge with prepared foods is just understanding food ingredients and what are the labeling requirements or, you know, management standards around that. So fortunately at Disneyland, we have a pretty robust team of food safety experts that have helped us with that and legal team. But that is another challenge of the pre-made foods or excuse me, the, you know, anyways.
Yeah,
Prepared foods. Thank you.
And that is why we do try to freeze everything and just keep it frozen whenever possible. I mean, of course, you're not going to throw produce in the freezer. Like you won't stick excess lettuce in there, but we are trying to do that just so that it's easier for us to make sure that it is properly maintained at the correct temperatures at all stages. Because Disney property is extremely large, so just transporting it from one location to another and then possibly holding it for a day or two while we're waiting for the arrival of the food bank, by freezing it allows us a leeway. It allows us a little bit more insurance to make sure that we are donating wholesome food.
Thank you, Chef Natalie. Thank you, Michael. And I kind of want to open this up to our other panelists too, because I know this is a really common question with regard to, you know, how much of the food being donated actually is pre-prepared food. So Margaret, if you wanted to chime in, or anyone from our Renaissance Pleasure Fair team, feel free to do so now.
Yeah, I will say the bulk of the food that we recover, this is our specialty. And it's our specialty for a reason, because of all of these questions. It's hard to safely recover prepared foods. It's a challenge. I shouldn't say it's hard. It just requires some really thoughtful logistics and pre-planning. So obviously we have refrigerated vans and we can safely recover prepared foods. So the restaurants depend on us, and the events, you know, we have a big golf tournament, they depend on us. The other key thing for us is that we're small and we're nimble. So we can pivot as needed in the community. We can get a call and be over there within the hour, sometimes sooner. So it is a specialty and it is not for everyone. And you really do need to make sure that you have your ducks in a row before you start taking prepared foods for human consumption.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Margaret.
and at the Renaissance fairs, I would say less than 10% of our food donated is prepared food. For those reasons, I am so hesitant to donate with the risks involved, and it's so difficult to find someone like Margaret that is just on the ball and willing to get there so quickly to pick up this food, that 90% of our food is in its raw form. Anything cooked too, we generally give our employees the option to take at the end of the day as well.
I mean, I will say that, you know, we had 100 pies day after Thanksgiving. You know, a lot of people are on holiday, the schools are out on break. So finding a home is what we do. So it's two-pronged. Not only do we go collect the food and recover it, now we're like, okay, where is this going to go? You guys will enjoy this. One time we got a big donation of liquid eggs. Liquid eggs, boy, that was a tough sell. But you know what? Salvation Army took it, and it did not go into the landfill. It's a win.
Thank you, Margaret. And yeah, we have heard that this is a challenge, but you know, we're thankful that we have organizations like yours who are finding ways to make this happen. We're going to turn it back to Renaissance Pleasure Fair. We have a question from Carla Chavez. It looks like their mic is not working today, so I'll be reading this one out loud. And the question is, Kristen, would you please share the resources you've provided to food vendors about the tax benefits of donations?
Oh yeah, good question. I am not a tax specialist, so I share almost no resources with them. I don't want to get myself or my company in any type of trouble. I just inform them that they will receive a receipt for their donation and they can use it accordingly, and allow their bookkeeper to inform them of how to use that. Most of our vendors though are pretty seasoned and understand that.
Thank you. And I have one more question for you, Kirsten. This question is from Susan Strand. Susan, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and read that question out loud for us.
Hi, yes, thank you. Oh, I think Kristen already answered, like most of the food that they recover is more shelf stable than the prepared food. I'm really hoping to learn from this webinar how our large venues here in West Sacramento can take prepared food at the end of the evening and have it redistributed. We were looking into purchasing a refrigerated van, so I'm kind of hoping to know if there's, what kind of characteristics we need to look for in a van. And maybe Margaret has some input on that.
I do, if you don't mind. I would like to address this. And the reason why it's so important is the first thing that I would ask you, Susan, or ask anybody, is to find out first within the community, is anybody else capable of doing this work? Or is there somebody I can partner with that has a refrigerated van already in place, a fellow nonprofit, or some way, just as the Ren Fair does? They're partnering with multiple organizations. Most of us have to. So rather than, find funding and get a van and get it outfitted and get it insured, and the maintenance is expensive and the insurance is expensive, find out first if there's a van. I'll bet you there is. In fact, I can find out offline with you, Susan, if there's somebody in West Sacramento, you're a neighbor. I'll bet you there is somebody doing food recovery that you might be able to partner with.
Thank you, Margaret, for jumping in there. And Kristen, did you have anything you wanted to share on that one?
No, I think Margaret nailed that. And I will say it is extremely important. I had a nonprofit show up last year without a refrigerated van, and I refused half of our donation to them. So it is extremely important to get that in place. And there are a lot of partners that will assist you. And you can even ask some of the local big corporations in the area, like Cisco or US Foods, if they have any recommendations as well.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. With that, we're going to move on to our next question. This question is directed at CalRecycle, and it's from Wes Yates. Wes, if you'd like to unmute yourself and read that question out loud for us, please.
Yeah, it's just more of a kind of broader regulatory question. So my city has a street fair event. That's kind of the purpose of it, is showcase local businesses. It's mostly non-food related, although there are just a few mobile food trucks. Some of them aren't even from within the city. So does this fall under edible food recovery requirements, and kind of how do you monitor that and regulate it, especially if they're leaving the city right after the event?
Hi, Wes. I can take this one. So first off, just, I guess, determining whether or not it even fits the definition of a large event. So that would be whether or not it is put on by a city agency, which maybe you indicated that it does in this case, and also serves an average of more than 2,000 individuals per day. And sorry, going back to that first part, whether it is operated by a local agency or charges an admission price. So either or there, and then also serves an average of more than 2,000. individuals. So that would be step one. And then two, if those food trucks or any food vendor for that matter truly is going elsewhere to reuse that food, then it wouldn't fall under these requirements simply because it's only surplus edible food needs to be recovered. So food that would be otherwise disposed. And then just one other to address the one other restriction here with food trucks. Kira actually mentioned it in one of her questions as well. Just that there is a limitation within the California Retail Food Code for potentially hazardous foods of mobile food facilities, which would be food trucks. So that is Health and Safety Code section 114305D. They state that potentially hazardous foods held at or above 135 degrees Fahrenheit on a mobile food facility or mobile support unit shall be destroyed at the end of the operating day. So just want to mention that there are limitations about donating directly from a food truck when you're dealing with hot prepared foods. Hope that helped.
Thank you, Danielle. I know that's a question that there's a lot of nuance to it, so I appreciate you digging into it. We have another question for our Renaissance Fair folks. This is another question from Nairi about vendor participation at the fair. Nairi, do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and read that question out loud for us? See, I'm not sure if they're able to unmute themselves right now, so I'm going to go ahead and read this one out loud for us. The question was, do the vendors at Ren Fair have to participate, or are they just given the option? How does that work? Thanks.
Yeah, they're not required to participate only because we have so many different types of vendors. Some are larger than others. Some are just small mom and pops. So a lot of them don't have anything left at the end of the day to donate. So I can't require someone to give something that they don't have. As I said earlier, I only require that they acknowledge that they received my email with the information of this program, and I require that they tell me one way or the other if they have a donation.
Thank you, Kirsten.
Of course.
Okay, we have another question from Kristen Sales. This question is for Disneyland. And this was the question about anaerobic digesters. Kristen, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and read that question out loud for us.
Yeah, I was just wondering if Disneyland had anaerobic digesters on site as a place for their food waste.
We do not. We used to have a little more space. I won't ever say a lot of space here at Disneyland, but we had a little more space. And since there's been a variety of park expansions, most of that space has been converted to other things. So we do work with Republic as our waste hauler, and so I know that they have some off-site locations where they do anaerobic digestion that they can take items to. I know Chef Natalie mentioned we also have the animal feed program. So most of those other diversion efforts that we're using are at off-site locations. We just don't really have that much space at the resort for those type of activities. Good question. Thanks.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, our next question here is from Caitlin. This is for our Renaissance Pleasure Fair folks. And this is a question about contacting the email that's shared with the vendors. Caitlin, if you'd like to unmute yourself and read that question out loud for us, please.
Hi, sure thing. My question was just for the Ren Fair and asked if they would be able to share the email that they send to vendors to notify them of the service that they're providing, and Kristen kindly responded.
Yeah, the email was in the slides. I don't know if that is available or how you would prefer that I share that. I'm definitely always happy to share any information that I have with, and any emails, any forms that I've already created. We had talked earlier in the week, and I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel. I think if we all work together, we can just make this wheel better. So if you have a suggestion on how you want that email, I can definitely get that to you, but it is in the slides.
Thank you, Kirsten. And we'll work to connect the two of you after this chat if needed.
Okay.
And also thank you for being willing to share that letter. I think having those peer share opportunities really helps us to all improve these programs that folks are working on. Our next question is for CalRecycle, and this is from Gary. So Gary, if you'd like to unmute yourself and please read that question out loud.
Sure, thank you. My name is Jerry Villalobos, and I'm with the City of Los Angeles. I know there's a lot of confusion with the way the regs are read, and people interpret it differently. So this is in regards to section 18991.3C, commercial edible food generators, and it states a large venue or large event generator that does not provide food services but allows for food to be provided, shall require food facilities operating at the large venue or large event to comply with the requirements of this section. So my question is, if it's determined that this section is not being complied with, who is the enforcement and penalty assessed to? Is a penalty and enforcement assessed to the venue management or the individual vendor located within that venue? In this case, the example that I'm putting out is a mall that has a food court which qualifies as a tier 2 EFG.
Yeah, hi Jerry. So in our regulations, the generator is the large venue. So even in a case like this, it is still the mall is the entity that needs to be ensuring that their vendors are complying. And if a city runs an inspection and finds out that the large venue is non-compliant because of one or more vendors, that NOV is issued to the venue operator. I will note just that through some conversations about this, we've heard different ways that people are approaching this, and some venues I think have considered like including these requirements into their leases with vendors. So they are responsible for ensuring that their vendors have the information, the education and outreach and expectation that they do need to be recovering their surplus edible food.
And a follow-up to that question, I know that the penalties aren't huge, but if assessed a penalty, then is it up to the mall management to recover the cost of those penalties from whatever vendors are not in compliance, or is it the management company just ultimately responsible for absorbing those penalties?
You know, that is an interesting take on that it could be passed on to a vendor, I think is what you're getting at.
Right.
And our regulations don't extend towards that, although I am noting that down just to have an internal conversation about it. Because ultimately, I mean, the penalty is given to that generator. I have not heard anything that would prevent them from, you know, requiring the vendors that were actually out of non-compliance for having some part in that. But it's something that I haven't seen in practice or come across yet. So it's something that I would like to talk about a little more and get back to you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you both. Okay, we have another question for CalRecycle. This is from Janine Martin. And this was about what qualifies as a large venue under 1383. Janine, if you'd like to please unmute yourself and read that question out loud for the chat. All right, I'm not sure if they're able to unmute themselves, so I'm going to go ahead and read this one out. The question is, CalRecycle, can you explain what would make the annual street fair event qualify as a large venue under 1383?
I can take this question. It looks like Janine is no longer in the meeting, but we did post the answer to her question in the Q&A. I simply posted the definition of large venue and large event. Some others may be interested in reading that, but it looks like her question pertains specifically to an annual street fair. So because it's annual, I'm leaning more towards thinking that this may be a large event, but again, it depends on if that definition is met. If Janine is on, maybe using a different name, please feel free to follow up with us at slcp.organics@calrecycle.ca.gov.
Thank you, Julia. Okay, our next question is for the panelists in general, and the question is from Helen Wolter. Helen, would you like to go ahead and unmute yourself and read that question out loud for us?
Zach, you're muted.
Thank you. So I'm not sure if Helen is still here with us, but I'm going to go ahead and read that question out for us. The question was, do any of the NGOs have safety issues that need to be addressed with the volunteers? Panelists, feel free to chime in if you have any input on this one.
Before the panelists jump on, Zach, would you be able to make Kara Morgan a co-host, please?
Yes, I would be happy to. Thank you.
Thank you. Back to you, panelists.
I don't know what an NGO is.
I believe that would refer to a non-governmental organization, so
Okay.
AKA a nonprofit. Yeah.
I'm like, I haven't heard NGO term, so I've been around for a while, and I'm like, well, why don't I know this? That's a loaded question. You know, supervision is just critical in this process. We have lead key people that are all food safety trained and food handling safe managers. So we really keep an eye on people, and we don't just send people out by themselves. That's the best way to handle that question.
Thank you, Margaret. I know that is a tricky question, so thank you for taking a crack at it. Let's see, let me find our next question here. This is a question for the Renaissance Fair folks, another one from Paulina. And this was about tracking of the donations. Paulina, if you'd like to go ahead and unmute yourself and read that question out loud.
Okay, thank you. And I appreciate you guys answering all my multiple questions. And I'm with the City of San Diego. I didn't mention that earlier, but I wanted to ask for the Renaissance Fair, who is responsible for weighing and tracking the donations? Does each vendor do that, or is that you guys doing it centrally? Thank you.
So, like I said, in LA, this is a newer program for us. And what I have each individual caterer take a photo of everything that they're donating. And then I have an assistant on this that also does the same. And this year we plan on having someone there to weigh it. The issue with weighing all of it, I understand the importance of it. However, weighing it when it's a pallet of food is not always the easiest. So I have just been tracking it with photos and estimations at this point. And Paulina, I'm also located in San Diego. My home office is in San Diego. So if there's an event here where there's questions, I'm more than happy to help out on that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paulina. All right, and Paulina, I think we had one more question from you. Let me see if I can find it here. All right, 1 second. Okay, question, this was relating to prepared food being a challenge, and just how organizations were utilizing that. Pliny, I believe you had a question for Margaret about this.
Yeah, thank you. And I feel like Margaret has covered this in some of the other responses that she's given, but the question, yeah, you touched on it, Margaret, that you guys are really looking for partners that can utilize prepared food. So, you know, we've heard that it's not every organization can accept it and use it. So I'm curious how you've been able to find those partners and how they do utilize that food. If maybe you could speak to that a little more. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, really, why are we collecting all this food if it doesn't have a home? So, great question. And, you know, you develop these partners, it happens like wildfire. When people hear that, you know, there's an organization with fresh produce twice a week, for example, from our farmers market, people call us. So, we, you know, the best advertisement would be that, not advertisement, that's a silly word, but the best outreach is that van with our logo and the phone number. And that's really how most of the people in the community find us. So that's the extent of our outreach campaign. We generally have more partners than food. So my role is continually building with restaurants and events and making sure we have enough food for those partners. So we're always simultaneously adding new community-based organizations and adding new donors. And we just match them up. And sometimes, as I mentioned earlier, we have to pivot or we'll get a big delivery of who knows what. So like Kirsten mentioned earlier, a pallet of something. So it's got to get out. So really it's just a question of them most often finding us.
Thank you, Margaret. Okay, we have a question for our panelists in general, and this is another one from Susan Strand about examples of prepared food being collected late at night. Susan, if you'd like to go ahead and unmute yourself and read that question out loud for us.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm just thinking about the particular situation that we have here. Is anybody collecting prepared food at the end of an event late at night? And how would you be able to redistribute that in a timely manner?
That's a great question. Yes, absolutely. In fact, most large events are ending at night because even if it's a giant golf tournament, they have their awards and their buffets or plated, whatever it is. And then we go in late at night and do take care of it. And then what the important thing is, all the chefs obviously know that the food has to be brought to temperature and then cold storage. So we just make sure that the temperature is maintained. We transport it to our cold storage. We have a big cold storage container that can house everything overnight. And then the next morning we get out there and get it out into the community. Great question, though.
I'll add just, I know Disneyland's a little different in that we're, you know, we've got fixed structures and we're not a temporary event, but in the same vein, I mean, that was why one of our initial filters on our permits was looking at infrastructure and refrigerator and freezer space because it's integral to storing those prepared foods and being able to stay within all the food safety standards. So even when we're looking at locations, we have to come to terms with the fact of like, do we have the necessary infrastructure, even if we wanted to do this, to do it in a food safe way? And then I guess that becomes, no pun intended, but food for thought later about, when we're planning and, for future projects or, building out, redoing fridge or freezer space, are we going to incorporate more space or more resources to be able to manage that process? So.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, Michael. And for our Renaissance Pleasure folks, or Pleasure Fair folks, that is, do either of you have any input on that with regard to late night food donation?
Yeah, we don't, again, we don't necessarily donate too much prepared food and late night food donations. We don't have anyone that is prepared to come pick those up either. So no, we don't do the late night. We just do a one time at the end of each season pickup of all of our leftover refrigerated and shelf stable items.
Thank you, Kirsten. Okay, we have a question from Bella Solons that was also directed at the Renaissance Pleasure Fair about the waste account for trash, recycling, and food waste. Bella, if you'd like to unmute yourself and read that question out loud for us, that would be excellent. Thank you. Okay, I'm not sure if Bella is still here with us. So that question was, who has the waste account for trash, recycling, and food waste services? Where does the food waste go, and how is it managed?
Yeah, so that's something we're currently working on. Athens has our account for waste, and recycling program is handled in-house. We have we actually allow our employees to set up recycling, can recyclings around and other recycling programs and take it in themselves. And the food waste, again, we're working on that program. And if anyone has any suggestions in that area, we're definitely open to it. As again, new program, one step at a time, and we hope to have that in place by this spring.
Kirsten,
Yeah.
I was curious to know, you're in San Diego?
Yes.
I don't know if the urban core is still in existence,
Oh,
but that's
let me interrupt that. I personally am located, my office is in San Diego. Our event is in Irwindale.
I see. Well,
Okay.
still to that point, I do want to share with anybody who's still here, you know, there are several conservation corps throughout the state that are jobs training programs. So generally you're going to get free labor to come in and sort your, you know, bins and such. I don't know if anybody's got experience with this, but surprisingly enough, about 10 years ago, I got a CalRecycle bottles and cans grant and was able to hire the local basketball team from a college. And I had them man every station and everybody sorted garbage for 2 days. And it was beautiful. What an experience. So you just need a lot of manpower if you're going to start managing the on-site waste. It's work.
Well, yeah, we actually have a lot of manpower. People our staff is very happy to come on Monday and sort through and take all the cans. We have no problem with that. It's the food waste, the food recycling and composting that we're now trying to implement this year.
Yeah, we had to do the 3-station outposts. So we had organics, bottles and cans, and then landfill, but we had to man every single station. It was a huge undertaking. I think we had 16 or 18 manned stations, but we had little prizes and giveaways, and they were identified with bright green aprons. And but the organics is challenging because you turn your back for a second, and before you know it, it's contaminated. So.
Yeah, and that's something we're just working through and trying to figure out what works best for our events.
Great. Thank you both for that conversation. I think that will be really useful for a lot of our attendees still here with us. We have a few questions left here that we're going to try to get to before we wrap up our Q&A for today. I know we've covered food trucks a couple of times here, but we have a question I think that digs into a new issue here from Ciara. This was about food trucks donating surplus food, and the question was just directed at our panelists generally. So Ciara, if you'd like to unmute yourself and read that question for us, and then any of our panelists can chime in.
Yeah, hi, thanks. And sorry to harp on this. I just wanted to ask if anyone has experienced, basically one thing that we're finding specifically is that a lot of the large events that we've identified locally are events that just use food trucks. And so I was just curious, given the restrictions with food trucks, if anyone can speak to whether they've had experience recovering surplus food from food trucks, or if they've found that food trucks generally don't have surplus to recover because of the restrictions and the fact that they can take, surplus that would be potentially donatable and reuse that at the next event. Not sure if anyone can speak to that, but would appreciate it if you can.
I'm kind of afraid to speak to it, but I will. I would just say we recover from food trucks that are consistently not at events, but consistently in the Napa area. So we have a couple of routes where we are picking up from them. So I don't know if that answers your question. It's not a ton, it's minimal because, as you mentioned, they pretty much know how to buy for the day or the event. But we do have one is a chicken food truck. So we have picked up from them. I don't know if that's a help or not. I don't know about regulatory, how to answer that question for you.
Margaret, that's helpful. And can I just ask, it sounds like you're doing that sort of regularly at the end of the week with them or something rather than at the end of an event. Is that right?
Yes, yes, that's a tentative yes, because honestly, for our large festivals, I don't think they're food trucks. So I would say, yeah, that would just be a regular pickup, or it's sporadic, I should say, but there are regularly they're a regular business that's there on an ongoing basis. Those
Yeah.
are the types of partners we have with regard to food trucks.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you both. Our next question is another one from Susan Strand about refrigerated vans. I know we've been talking about refrigeration and food safety a lot, so I think this could be an interesting answer for everyone. Susan, do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask that question for us?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I kind of already asked this, but if there was any recommendation for a van, the city has funding for food recovery, and right now we don't have any food recovery organizations willing to accept food from tier 2. But we have one that's interested, and they're interested in a van. So I'm just wondering if there are any recommendations for what we want to have in that van, if there's a particular maker that's making a van that you would recommend, that would be great.
Well, yes, I can help you with that. And I know way too much about this, way more than I ever wanted to know, because we actually had a Ford Transit. I can't remember. We have a Mercedes and we have a Ford. And the Ford, we actually received a grant, $50,000 grant to outfit it with refrigeration and solar. So that's a project we just got funded. So we're working on adding that van and getting it ready for, we will be using predominantly electric going forward, because the whole point of our organization is to reduce landfill and reduce our carbon footprint in the work that we're doing. So for us, it makes more sense for us to use the electric van wherever possible with our solar. So we're having fun getting quotes, and I'm happy to talk with you offline, Susan, and help you connect to, we just went to the dealership. We went to the Mercedes dealership and got one of the transits, and we have a connect, like I said. And there's all kinds of options you can add. And, do you want to lift? That's a whole nother, $12,000 or however much you're going to add. So I can give you more details on that separately. But yeah, there are two major players in these vans that I can help you with.
All right, thank you so much, Margaret. We're going to have one more question before we wrap up our Q&A today. And Margaret, I just want to thank you for chiming in so often and answering so many of these questions. We really do appreciate it. You've had a lot of really good insight to share. Our final question is going to be directed at Disneyland. And this was a question from Ciara Lowe about the process for ensuring that the maximum amount of food is donated. Ciara, if you'd like to unmute yourself one more time and read this question out loud for us, please.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks so much to the panelists. It's been great presentations and you've answered all of our questions so well. Yeah, one last question for Disneyland. I was just wondering, because we know for some of our large venues that are large like yourselves, it can be difficult to ensure that everyone on site is donating the maximum amount. And I was just wondering if you can speak to what process you use to communicate and make sure that's happening at all of your various sites. And then I was also curious if you hold the food recovery contracts and records of pounds donated centrally yourselves, or if those records are held at each of the sites independently. Thanks.
Mike, did you want to take that one? Well, I'll start with the last part of your questions. We do have a team that is focused, or they're considered our social responsibility partners, and they're able to keep the records. So it's like one of the systems that we use, the main system that we use for tracking our inventory and products within the resort, that kind of collects all of the information that they do need. As long as our receivers are being responsible, they enter it. We kind of call them out when they don't. If we notice that it hasn't been entered, and then they're able to get into the system and it collects it all so that it can be reported. And then Michael, I'll let you take the first part of that question.
Yeah, in terms of the logs, it's really more like Chef Natalie mentioned, we've kind of added that piece of tracking donation movements and tracking inventory in the system. And I apologize, Chef Natalie, what was the name of the new system called again? I'm blanking on it.
Crunch Time.
Crunch Time, yes. So it was not the intent of the system. The system is really just an overall, food and beverage inventory system, but it was something we were able to incorporate as a workflow into it. And then another challenging element is we have our operating partners, so tenants that are in downtown Disney locations, restaurant locations, and so the expectation for them is that they're managing their own logs and tracking that. I know somebody else had mentioned earlier in one of the questions about getting accurate weights, and so that was also something we were discussing with the city, and like, could we weigh like one tray and then use that as somewhat of a extrapolate from there, like, oh, okay, we got a whole pallet of trays, we know one tray weighs 5 pounds, so that's 100 pounds or something like that. So it is, I would say the tracking is still somewhat manual and could be a mix of digital or even paper files. But hopefully with time we'll streamline it. It's tough with the OPs though, with the operating partners, because we don't have a lot of control. We can offer them the Disneyland process to a certain extent, but a lot of times they opt for their own processes. So
I think we are a bit blessed too that with the system, our new system, it does kind of help us to tally the weights, get accurate weights, as well as quantities that are being donated. That's something that was incorporated and easy for us to track. We're able to see the dollar value that's been donated or accounted for, as well as that true weight. And I will pass it to Margaret.
Just wanted to add that we utilize ChowMatch tracking software, and all of our donors and recipients are in the ChowMatch system. And ChowMatch is a wonderful program. And the most important thing that it does is it converts everything into greenhouse gas conversions and in meals served. So we take every 1.2 pounds and use that calculation to how many meals and how many people we've served. So if anybody in the smaller groups is interested, ChowMatch has been a godsend for us.
Great, thank you so much, Margaret and Chef Natalie and Michael. With that, we'll wrap up our Q&A. If you did submit your question to us and we didn't get to it live here in the chat, we will be following up with you later. If you were unable to submit your question, the slcp.organics inbox email address is on the screen there, and you can submit your questions there. And with that, I will pass it off to Julia. Julia, go ahead. Julia, I believe you're muted. Sorry.
Thank you, Zach. This concludes today's SB 1383 chat with CalRecycle. We're incredibly grateful to our presenters for sharing their insights and to all our attendees for taking the time to join us and learn more about edible food recovery. Your engagement is what makes these chats so valuable, and we appreciate your participation. If you have any questions, recommendations, or suggestions for future topics, please don't hesitate to email the SLCP inbox. And if you haven't already, we encourage you to sign up for our SB 1383 listserv to stay informed about upcoming chats, new resources, webpage updates, and more. Now I'll turn it over to Marshall for closing remarks.
Wonderful, and thank you. We had stellar presentations today and absolutely engaging questions and answers. I thought it was phenomenal that each of you also touched on the benefits to the participants as well as the community. It's a very inspiring. So again, gratitude to all of you that made today possible and a huge success. Again, these SB 1383 chats are for you. Please take the opportunity to let us know if you want to learn more or if you have information or program resources to share. We plan to have a large venues and events webinar on organics collection around summertime. So until then, thank you again. Take care of yourself and each other.